Please welcome the president of Stony University, Angela Goldsmith.
Hello and good morning. I'm so thrilled to welcome you to the first of our 3 presidential panels taking place this morning. I am so honored that this incredible group of remarkable leaders is here to participate in what will be an insightful and inspiring discussion of women in engineering. These women are so unbelievably accomplished and inspiring to me, and to so many others. They're role models. They're just rock star engineers and leaders. And they are doing this in so many different dimensions of engineering, which we're going to hear about through our discussion. I know the audience, particularly our students, will find the panel to be informative, uplifting, and motivating. And I'm looking forward to hearing our panelists' thoughts on what excites them about the future of technology, how it will benefit humanity, and also hear about their professional journeys. And I hope that we're not going to agree with each other on everything. I really like panels that are spicy, and this is a spicy group, I know. So I'm looking forward to having some fireworks between us as we talk about technology and engineering and leadership. This is really an opportunity for our students and our researchers, faculty, and community members to hear from truly exceptional individuals who'll share their insights about their professional journeys, the challenges that they've overcome, and how they've achieved such incredible strides in engineering across academia, industry, startups, government, nonprofits. I hope these conversations will spark ways for our community to grow and think about engineering and leadership in new ways, also to strengthen our engineering programs and produce more leaders in the field. One of the things I love about being in a university is that we are teaching and inspiring and motivating the next generation of leaders. And I hope that some of the pearls of wisdom that you take away from this conversation will motivate you to think about leadership in engineering and other fields. As well as growing technology, I like to talk about Stony Brook as a catalyst for innovation and entrepreneurship across Long Island, which I'm now referring to as Silicon Island, taking a page from how Stanford transformed the peach trees around the university in the 1950s into a really vibrant tech hub. So I have the incredible honor and privilege of moderating today's panel. And I'm thrilled to welcome these leaders, especially coming as part of my inauguration. Thank you so much for being here. And if I were to read their incredibly impressive bios, we would have no time for questions. So I'm just going to do a few brief highlights of their incredible careers and accomplishments. So I'll start with Jennifer Cochran, who's Vice President for the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory, which is a U.S. Department of Energy national lab, just like Brookhaven, which is right up the street from us. And she is also Vice President for Strategic Initiatives at Stanford. She's a named inventor on over 50 issued and pending patents, a serial entrepreneur who's founded several companies, including Two-Step Therapeutics, Photinia Biosciences, Excella Biosciences, and Combangio, if I said that correctly. So she wasn't satisfied with starting 1 or 2 or 3. She had to do all these startups to really translate the amazing research from her lab into practice, and they've all been incredibly successful startups. In 2020, she co-founded Red Tree Venture Capital, a West Coast-focused life science investment fund, where she is their chief scientific officer. Jennifer and I were colleagues for 15 years at Stanford before I left in 2020, although we're still colleagues because I'm an emerita there. We worked together on several university-wide committees when we were baby professors and through tenure and beyond. And I was so impressed with Jennifer's wisdom and leadership and insights in all the committees that we worked on together. She was also instrumental in the launch of Stanford's bioengineering department, the only department at Stanford between 2 different schools, the School of Medicine and the School of Engineering, and she later chaired that department. So she's an entrepreneur in the broadest sense, not just in starting companies, but also in starting academic departments. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer.
Next, we have Ayanna Howard, who's the Dean of Engineering at The Ohio State University and the Monte Ahuja Endowed Dean's Chair, as well as an international expert in robotics and AI. Her innovative research has been helpful to NASA laboratories, and she's been recognized as one of the 23 most powerful women engineers globally, as well as one of the most influential women corporate board directors. Ayanna became an engineering dean shortly after I did, and I've greatly admired her vision and impact at Ohio State and on their engineering school throughout her dean tenure. She also founded the educational technology company Zyrobotics, and she's one of the few engineering deans in the country, past or present, who's also a startup founder. So please join me in welcoming Ayanna. Next is Muriel Medard, who's the NEC Professor of Software Science and Engineering in the School of Engineering at MIT. There she leads the Network Coding and Reliable Communications Group in the Research Laboratory for Electronics. She is also a serial entrepreneur, if you notice the pattern here. She's founded Codon, Steinwolf, Chocolate Cloud, and Optima. She also served as president of the Information Theory Society and established its Women in the Information Theory Society Committee, as well as its mentoring program, for which she received the 2017 Aaron Weiner Distinguished Service Award. I first met Muriel when I interviewed for a faculty job at MIT in 1994, so that's how long we've known each other. We were both graduate students at the time, and our conversations during that interview, she started by grilling me, and then we turned to talking about research. And then the following year, we met at a wireless conference, and those conversations sparked a decades-long collaboration and a true treasured friendship. We've worked together on 15 joint papers, several large multi-university research programs, and many diversity and student initiatives in the Information Theory Society and the IEEE. So please join me in welcoming you. And last, but definitely not least, is Telly Whitney. She's a senior executive leader, entrepreneur, and recognized advocate and expert on women in technology. Following her doctoral work in computer science at Caltech in the 1980s, she moved to Silicon Valley to design computer chips and the software that supported them at a time where there were very few women technologists in the Valley or really anywhere. She co-founded the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing Conference in 1994 and was the CEO of the nonprofit Anita Borg Institute for 15 years. Her leadership of the Anita Borg Foundation was truly transformative in demonstrating the business value of diversity and the importance of engaging the full talent of the workforce to drive innovation. I always say that diversity is about excellence, and Telly has really brought that out in the engineering profession, probably more than anybody else that I know. Her work was also instrumental in encouraging more women to enter, remain, and thrive in computer science and electrical engineering. So for her strides and worldwide efforts, Telly was named one of Fast Company's most influential women in technology. Please join me in welcoming Telly. So I was fortunate to get to know Telly through the Women in Technology Leadership Roundtable, an organization which began in 2015 under the leadership of Tsu-Jae King Liu at UC Berkeley, who's now the president of the National Academy of Engineering. And that group was really meant to move the needle on making the technology industry more diverse and inclusive. We still have a ways to go when it comes to that topic. So it was an incredible honor to work with Telly, given the profound influence that she's had on showcasing the importance of diversity for engineering excellence. Now, there was one more panelist, Manuela Veloso, who was hoping to join us to participate in today's conversation. She regretfully could not come due to a sudden death in her family. She sends her best wishes to all of us for a wonderful panel. So with that, I'd like to turn to the questions and kick off our discussion by talking about the expansive and rewarding career paths these outstanding women with me today have taken. So I'll just read the question and then you can answer in any order that you like. Jump in whenever you wish. Your professional journeys have spanned industry, academia, government, startup companies, often more than one, and a startup nonprofit. Tell us about your professional journeys, and did you anticipate your journeys unfolding as they did?
I'll go.
Go for it.
So I am a non-traditional X in any form and fashion. And so I think part of it is I've always lived by my values and my passion. I started off at NASA because I wanted to do robotics, and the only place that wasn't either automotive or military was NASA. I went into academia because I realized I liked students and I still want to do robotics. So sure, I'll just try academia. I did administration because I was voluntold for my first position. And I was like, oh, this is actually pretty interesting. I did a startup because my grad student said, I'd like to do a startup. I wanted to support. So I think my journey has really just been about opportunities and aligning my passion with my values and then being open to exploring it. And no, I never thought that I would be where I am today. Growing up in Pasadena public school system, scholarship kid, never realized that there was a possibility and a journey that was open to anyone who was excellent. And so I'm very fortunate and very blessed in that regard.
Wow, wonderful.
So for me, I found Silicon Valley, and I had found computer science when most people didn't even know what it was. But Silicon Valley was so exciting because of its entrepreneurial spirit. And I participated in a few startups, and we really believed that the technology we were creating could change the world, no question. I took a pretty serious left turn. My friend had founded this nonprofit called the Institute for Women in Technology, and she was diagnosed with brain cancer. So sometimes your career takes turns when it's unanticipated, and I took over the nonprofit. I brought those same entrepreneurial skills to the Native Work Institute, and I made a huge difference in people's lives. So I grew it in the same way that I'd seen done with startups, but I loved the work that I was doing.
Maybe I can go next. So I definitely took a lot of turns, often by happenstance, but I think, as you said, it's about being open to the opportunities and approaching everything with passion and, a real sense of purpose. And I think if you do something that you think is worthwhile, even if it ends up not working out, you will not feel that it was a waste of time, right? Because you did something that was inherently useful and valuable. I went to MIT, sort of stayed in grad school, who knows why, I was there, and my husband at the time was in the military. I needed something to do while he was deployed, and I was like, well, I'm here. Oh, look, there's a thesis. Then, sort of graduated, didn't know if I was going to work or not, looked at jobs within like a 3-mile radius of my daughter's daycare, picked the only one that had nothing to do with my PhD so I would learn something new. And so I was just, bopping along, and I was remembering a late night conversation with Andrea where she went, well, why don't you go into academia? And it was this sort of, lightning bolt of obviousness. Well, yeah, you're right. So anyway, fast forward, go to MIT, again, start startups because you really believe in the technology, and you have this feeling that if you don't do it, it's not going to happen. And so you just go, okay, I have to do it, And so it really, there were so many left turns, right turns, U-turns, who knows. I live in Boston, so, it sort of mirrors the way we drive in Boston. But, all along you're going, okay, this is really interesting. I really believe in this. It's amazing how often things work out, to me. That was the thing that was amazing, because very often I would look at, whatever project and say, this is extremely high risk, But if you go in, it's like, okay, I'm just going to do my best, and I'm going to be really trying to take the input as my control, and the output will be what it is. You feel very rewarded. It's amazing how often it works out, actually.
So first of all, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to come here today and speak to this great audience and in the company of such a distinguished panel, and very special to be part of your inauguration events. Congratulations. I notice a theme here of twists and turns, and kind of looking back over my career, I never thought in a million years I'd be up on a stage sitting here talking about my leadership journey. I actually started out at community college, and I wanted to be a musician, and I ended up transferring to the four-year college after I got my associate's degree, where I discovered chemistry and biology and fell in love with it. And it took me quite a while to get a bachelor's degree because I had to transfer and then take classes over, and at the time it was like, oh my gosh, this is such a long journey compared to some of my classmates and peers. But it's just a blip in the grand scheme of things, and also an example of how one's career kind of takes many twists and turns. After getting my bachelor's degree, I had been hanging out with the grad students there, and I saw what they were doing. I got excited about research. You know, I'm one of the first people in my family to go to college, and certainly to go on for a PhD, so I didn't really have exposure to what that was like. And on a recommendation from some of my professors, I applied to MIT. It was the best $50 I ever spent. I never in a million years thought I would get in, and I did, and it was really life-changing for me to go there for graduate school in biological chemistry. And then I ended up doing a postdoc there in biological engineering, and then I did a fellowship at UPenn in molecular biophysics. And around that time, Stanford was starting a new bioengineering department. And gosh, who gets to start a department in their lifetime? I just wanted to be a part of it. It was such an exciting opportunity, especially for somebody who had a non-traditional background like myself, chemistry, PhD, biological engineering postdoc, and then a biophysics fellowship. So again, applied to Stanford and was thrilled to be accepted into a position there, and had a number of leadership positions over the years, running a research group as well, focusing on protein therapeutics. So I think it's just an example of how one's life can kind of take a lot of twists and turns and evolve. And sometimes my students, when I'm talking to them, they're like, okay, well, I don't know if I want to do industry or academia or startups. And I'm like, well, in our jobs, we get to do all of those. So it takes a while, and you have to kind of build up your experiences and network. But I feel like we have the best jobs in the world, and get to have a lot of freedom and flexibility in what we do. So yeah, it's just great to be here with everyone today.
It's, I think that one of the themes that we've heard a lot, this notion of twists and turns, and not really necessarily knowing the destination, but enjoying the journey. And that's certainly been true for me also. People say, did you always know you wanted to be a university president? It's like, yeah, from birth, you know, you come out, absolutely. Of course not, you know, and I think what I've heard in this discussion and also in my own journey is you follow your passion. You find something that excites you, and you just tune out the doubters, which these women were engineers at a time when there weren't a lot of women. Certainly when I was at Berkeley as an undergrad, there wasn't a lot of encouragement. Tele had a previous generation. You just tune out the doubters, whether it's that you can do engineering, or you can do a startup, or you can start a new department, or you can lead a national laboratory, or start a nonprofit, or do startups. You just tune out the doubters because it's something you're passionate about and you believe in. And then there is no failure, because even if your startup doesn't work out, or your nonprofit doesn't work out, or you don't get the position you thought you would get, there's something joyous about that journey. Yeah. And failure often is the best path to success. I was rejected from Stanford for graduate school. And I like to say, you know, well, if you're to all these students that are maybe going to get rejected from graduate school, you may end up teaching at that university someday, you know? So you never know when a door closes, what other door it's going to open. And so I think this story of these journeys is very much about that. Just enjoy the destination and do what you love. And that sounds kind of trite, do what you love, but I think it's what's fueled all of our careers and all of the careers of the successful people that I know. So I want to come back a little bit to the notion of the career in engineering that you all selected. You could have done many different things. Obviously, you're incredibly talented. And you talked a little bit in talking about your journey, why you went to grad school, because it was the only thing that came to mind, or you fell in love with biology and chemistry. But what was it specifically about engineering, we're all engineers, that inspired you first to go into the profession and then stay in it for decades. I mean, I'm still incredibly passionate about engineering and technology, and I know all of you are as well. What fuels that passion, and what fueled it at the beginning?
I'll start out. I mean, I did not have a grand plan. I was at the University of Utah. My family's from Utah, and I stumbled around. I took something called an interest test, which compared your interest, and programming came up, and I really did discover computer science. And from the first class, which was taught by a woman, I loved computer science. But also what was really important is that one of the faculty members noticed me, and he introduced me to somebody who was founding a department at Caltech. And the courage to take risks of doing something when it presents itself is so fundamental to at least my journey. And I was scared to death, but I went to graduate school, studied with this wonderful man, and I love the fact that we were inventing a field. I mean, that was what kept me coming back, and it has continued to do that to today.
Yeah, I can go next. So I went to MIT without a plan. I thought I'd be a math major because I could do math, and I loved literature, so I was doing math, and I was also double majoring in Russian lit, because 19th century Russian lit, so many jobs in that. And I took, like it was pass fail or whatever. You could take some random class, and I took a class in electrical engineering. And I did not see myself as an engineering. I actually came from a very academic family, but it's like the other extreme. My mother taught ancient history, okay? And so I discovered that there was something which had the rigor of math, which I really enjoyed, and had the creativity of literature, which I also enjoyed. That was just a complete surprise that you could do both, right? I mean, like, how on earth, whoa, this is amazing, right? And it was a little challenging because, there were very, very few women in electrical engineering, but, a lot of people seemed like they had actually tinkered. I had never tinkered with a darn thing, I'm sitting there with, like, the soldering iron going, okay. Try again, But it was just so interesting. It was just so interesting. So then I added a third major. I took engineering and computer science, and I stayed. And every time, going back to what you were saying, like, oh, wow, that is really interesting. So it was always a pull. It was always a pull.
So I wanted to be a roboticist since I was probably 2.
Oh, wow.
So actually, I decided I was always into sci-fi, science fiction, so anything from Battlestar Galactica to Star Trek to Star Wars. And in the 6th grade, remember that essay that you had to do about what do you want to do when you grow up and die? So I said I wanted to build a bionic woman.
Oh,
because
wow.
at the time, like, I was into science, and there was like Lindsay Webb. It was like, oh my gosh, yes, that's what I want to do.
There was a bionic woman on TV.
Yes,
right?
yes, I wasn't, not Trevor. I mean, it was like the bionic woman. And I remember my teacher said, well, what's the career? Like, building bionic woman, what's the career? And at the time, I said I wanted to go to doctor, because in the TV show, like, the cool people were the doctors. And there were some engineers, but they were like in the back with the pocket protector and the glasses. So I wanted to be the doctor, and I went to high school and had to take biology, and I so admire scientists. I hated it. I literally was like, and back then, you would have to dissect frogs.
Yep. I remember that. I was like,
yeah, same. Never was going to be a biologist or a doctor because of the frog dissection.
Yeah, so you're lucky you guys don't have to do that now.
Maybe they do. I don't know. How many have dissected a frog in high school? Okay.
Oh, see? Okay, so I did not have the stamina or the perseverance or resilience to do that. I admire the ones that did. And so I had another teacher who was actually the physics teacher, said, well, why not engineering? And I was like, like those pocket protector folks? She's like, just try it. And so I decided to do engineering, and I chose my university, Brown, because you did not have to declare your engineering major until your junior year. And so I could be like, oh, I have no idea what engineering is with respect to robotics, but I can try to figure it out in my first 2 years. And fell into computer engineering because it was the closest to what I could do in robotics and programming and electrical and mechanical and all of that. And so that's how I chose it. It was robotics, not necessarily engineering, but now I'm a cool kid again.
So I mentioned that I was in community college and we had lab work, and that was a really transformative experience for me, going into the chemistry lab and mixing two solutions together and watching it change color. I'm sure many of you in the audience have done that. And this was the days before Harry Potter, but I felt like a wizard. And I wanted to understand, gosh, that was so cool, like how was that working? And it started from there, the spark, being in the laboratory and getting to do research.
Did you blow up anything?
I did not blow up anything. I wasn't that bold, but just trying to understand on a molecular level the chemicals and how they were reacting, and then biochemistry, because all of these processes were happening in your body without you even thinking about it. That was just super cool, how nature's kind of evolved all of us and all of our biochemical workings, if you will. And I started out as a chemistry major, as I mentioned, at MIT to get my PhD. And I did that because I wanted a quantitative, rigorous kind of background in molecular sciences. And when I was there, I was fortunate enough to be on a training grant that was a biotechnology-focused training grant that brought students from all over the university together. And it was there that I met Doug Laufenberger and Linda Griffith, who many of you might know. Doug was the founding chair of the bioengineering department, or biological engineering department at MIT, and was running the training program and hanging out with Doug and Linda and their colleagues. Doug was like, I actually think you're an engineer. You think like an engineer, you want to do applied types of work. And in fact, my thesis was a biochemical demonstration of a mathematical model that had been developed in the 80s. And when the data came out, it was the first experimental demonstration of that. And the pieces started to click there. And so I started hanging out more with the biological engineers. And that's really what drew me in. I wanted to do things that were very applied. And also looking back, because I told you earlier that I wanted to be a musician and I was really into art. And I realized that engineering allows me to tap into my creative side. And so I like to think of myself as a molecular artist, if you will, except instead of using paint or musical notes, I use molecules and atoms and amino acids. And so I think it allows me to tap into my creative side while also being rigorous and focusing on the engineering sciences as well.
I like to think of myself as an accidental engineer because I had no idea I was going to be an engineer. When I applied to Berkeley, my dad, who was a mechanical engineering professor at Berkeley, said, declare engineering because your grades are going to drop precipitously when you go to Berkeley, and you will never get into engineering if you don't apply going in. And he was right. My grades dropped precipitously. I declared engineering math because I like math. But I wanted to do something that mattered, and to me, pure math just didn't seem that interesting. And I really did not enjoy engineering as an undergraduate. I didn't have any professors that deeply inspired me. Some of the classes, like the mathematical ones, signals and systems and control theory, I liked, but I just wasn't inspired by engineering. And I thought, well, at least engineering, I was taking a lot of political science, and I almost became a political science major. Especially when my grades in engineering were dropping so precipitously, but fortunately I stayed in engineering. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll get an MBA or a law degree. Engineering's a good foundation for whatever I want to do next. It never occurred to me as an undergrad I would stay in engineering. And then I was so fortunate that my first job, which was in Silicon Valley in wireless communication in the mid-'80s, before cell phones, you probably don't remember that time, before cell phones, before Wi-Fi, the only communications, which was a very mathematical area of engineering, was in defense. So I joined a small defense startup, terribly run startup, taught you everything about how not to run a startup. They didn't last very long, but it was still a great experience to work in a startup and to have responsibility to build these systems. And I just found wireless communication magical. The fact that you could communicate and envisioning what that might mean for the world. If you could do wireless communication anywhere in the world. And we didn't know if it would pan out that way, but I just found the technology magical. And that's why I decided to go back to grad school. And then I was hooked. I think once I fell in love with the technology, there was no destiny for me other than being an engineer. So it's really interesting to hear how all of us kind of came at it, some from 2 years old, some from post-undergraduate, and everything in between. Mentoring has come up a little bit. I mean, Muriel mentioned just a late night conversation where I said you should apply to academia. You'd be an amazing professor. And that also shows that mentors aren't just old people. They're your peers. Sometimes you learn from the people younger than you. I find our students are incredible mentors and teachers for me. So what role did mentors and supporters and teachers play in your careers? And how do you approach mentoring others as a result? I'll just give one more anecdote. On Saturday, my inauguration events kicked off with a conversation with John King, who wrote a book on teachers and how teachers had such a huge impact on his life and his career, that it was elementary school where he found a haven from a challenging home life, and that it was his teachers that believed in him long before he believed in himself. And we see that with mentors and supporters. So I'd love to hear from all of you where mentors and supporters and teachers came in to your careers. Jennifer, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, I've already mentioned a little bit with Doug and Linda, but I feel, to your point, I'm constantly still learning and being mentored, and also at the same time giving back and mentoring others. I think it's why we all became educators in some way, shape, or form. Every step of the way, every step of my journey, mentors have been critical in helping to define a path, giving advice, especially when we're talking about all the twists and turns that our careers have taken. And I think there's just such a special place in at least my heart for giving back to others in the same way that I've been enabled and have received advice. And it's probably the greatest reward that I have as a professor. But then same thing even in the industrial or startup world as well. Sometimes, you're spinning out a company with your former students and it's the first time that they're doing it. Mentoring there is really important. Mentoring for me was really important because I had never started a company before. And so relying on the support and advice of others to take through that journey. I think where would we be without mentors? I'll just leave it at that and pass it on to my colleagues.
I think happy accidents, certainly happenstance seems to be a theme today, and mentoring will be no different. I didn't set out to be a mentor. It literally just happened, when our, so my department is the largest department. We have about 140 students, 140 faculty, and about 800 or so students. When the graduate students elected their first graduate mentor, I didn't even know this election was going on, and over a third of the students voted for me. And then, when we had the first ever postdoctoral association mentoring award, and then we have 1,300 faculty at MIT, they also voted for me. So people were voting, and I didn't know I was in the running, and B, I didn't know I was doing it, which is, So I get asked this a lot, and I always say, I don't have anything smart to say, so today will be no different. I think the idea was just that, you were having conversations with people and trying to tell people, A, listen, and B, tell people what you wish you had been told, or maybe you had been told. And frankly, sometimes it was literally that simple, right? To me, a lot of the mentoring was just acting with people as people the way you would want to, not just maybe the way you would want people to act towards you, but I would say, particularly with students, don't treat them the way you would have wanted to be treated, because, frankly, we all have pretty thick skins. But, treat the way you want other people to treat your kids, right? And then once you have that framework, I think that to me is how it changes. And it doesn't mean you give them a pass, because but it's about trying to really be helpful and at a very personal, respectful, caring level. And it's amazing how far that takes. So it's a very simple, it's almost trite, but it's literally that simple, I think.
And Muriel was dorm mom to hundreds of students at MIT, so she's speaking about this from massive experience. Right?
Yes, I was head of house for 7 years, living with 350 students, and with many, many stories, which I know
I heard many of them.
have regaled my friends with. But it was such a privilege to actually have this sort of living relationship with students at a crucial time in their lives. And we've heard from so many of the people here how that there are those very crucial articulation points in your career where it could go one way or the other. And by the way, it's not a disaster if it goes way B rather than way A, but to be there and to be able to help, or at crisis times, which at the time look absolutely disastrous, but then, 10 years later will look like just a bump in the road. Being able to be there it is really a privilege, and again, it's something that you carry with you as very cherished memories.
So I already mentioned that as an undergraduate, a faculty member changed my life. I mean, he really encouraged me to go to graduate school, and I'm still in touch with him. It really was very fundamental, and I do think that all faculty have that opportunity for students. My PhD thesis advisor was a man named Carver Mead from Caltech, and he's what they call a sponsor, and a sponsor helps you find your next position. And he stood by me. I knew he believed in me. He introduced me to, I think my first 3 jobs came through introductions with Carver. And then the third mentor I'll mention is Maria Clave, who I think will be here on the next panel.
Yes.
And during the time when I was starting the nonprofit, Maria was just there. She helped me with everything, and I really depended on her in important ways. Today, I really make a choice that whenever somebody wants to meet with me, I do my best to say yes. And I try to mentor the next generation, and it's very fulfilling.
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to piggyback off of, thinking about mentors, and Telly mentioned sponsorship. So I'd say mentors advise, sponsors promote, and I think both are important. And I think as leaders, we think about and do both, mentorship and sponsorship. And I would say and they can be equal. So I would say one of my most memorable sponsors / mentors was my supervisor at NASA. So when I received my PhD, I'd been working, NASA paid for my graduate education, and he called me in. He was like, "I'd like you to lead this little project." I was like, "Oh, sure, why not?" Did not know it was looking at advanced Mars rover navigation. He had a team, and he wanted me to lead that. But what he did, though, in terms of the sponsorship is behind the room, he was laying the path. He was basically telling, I was the only female, for example, in the group. He's like, "Look, she's better than all of y'all," right? Like he was doing all of those things in the back of the room, so when I showed up, I could just lead. I didn't have to try to fight all the time. And so that sponsorship, you don't know where it's coming from. Sometimes you never know until you're like 60. And you're like, "Oh, you were my sponsor back when I was 30. But I think it's so important. So since you mentioned that, I wanted to put a double click on that. That mentorship, really, really important. But that sponsorship also is just as important.
So 2 things I want to say about mentoring. One is that it's among the most rewarding things that I've done in my career. When I look at recognition for my professional accomplishments, the words for mentoring are the most meaningful because they really pay it forward, and you have such a big impact on people's lives. So for those of you that may be shy about asking someone to meet with you or to mentor you or to sponsor you, just recognize how meaningful it is to the person that you're asking. When I look at my students, going back to my first PhD student and all of the students I mentored, they're like my kids. They give me so much incredible joy to watch them thrive and know I played a small role. So don't be shy seeking out mentors and supporters. And then the other thing I want to say is that your mentors and supporters may be different for different dimensions of your life. So I had my 2 greatest mentors professionally were my PhD advisor and my boss at Bell Labs for a summer internship. And my PhD advisor taught me a lot about research, but nothing practical about how to get a job or how to publish a paper. That's what my Bell Labs mentor did. And then there's peer mentors. Muriel and I were untenured professors with little kids. There was nobody around us that were untenured women professors with little kids, and we talked a lot about how do we navigate the challenges of work-life balance. And so finding mentors in the dimension of your professional and personal life that can help you is important to recognize. It won't necessarily be someone who looks like you. It won't necessarily be someone who has the same goals in all dimensions. Mentorship is a broad-based undertaking.
Can I add something to that?
Of course.
Also, if you're a mentee, say thank you.
Yes.
I will say, as a mentor, I get emails sometimes from, hey, Dr. H. So, hey, Dr. H, you probably don't remember me, but da 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 da. And now I'm VP at Google. I mean, I'm like, I don't even remember the student. But I will tell you, as a mentor, it feels so good to know that you had some impact on someone's life, 20 years in some cases. And so I just say thank you. You don't know how rewarding it is as a mentor, even if I don't remember, to say, oh my gosh, like I had an impact.
Yes to that. Yeah. Yes. To
Anyone
that.
else have stories about?
I just wanted to maybe, you mentioned the mentoring program in our society, and the professional society that Andrea and I sort of came through our academic career in, it was a very academically challenging society. It's a very hard society to make a mark in. And you were talking about mentee. So the idea behind it is I was actually mentoring a junior faculty at in the University in Iowa, and basically we're having some late night calls and giving him feedback about his NSF career proposal, and he goes, I feel so bad about this. I was like, why? He goes, well, you're doing all this work. I was like, no, that's okay. He said, look, I would feel better if we had a contract so that I know, what you're signing up for, and I was like, okay, that's a great idea. So he basically said, I will call you no more than this, you will read no more than this proposals, but, there was like a contract, and I was like, this is brilliant. And I said, can I borrow this and make it more general? And he said, yes, of course. And then I went to the board of governors of our society and I said, look, mentoring seems to be a difficult aspect for people to get ahead, particularly for people who maybe are not at limelight institutions, or people who don't have, very famous advisors like Andrea and I did. Can we do this? And it was basically, based on this contract. And it was like a 3-year contract. And then I said, but if you're a mentee, you have to sign up to then yourself become a mentor, right? So then, we all know how that growth goes, exponential growth, talking about, so like, okay, this is actually going to have the right feedback. You can grow this because, not everybody is going to want to actually be a mentor even they signed up for it, but the ones who don't probably shouldn't. And that's why it has had that staying power. So the thank you, but also maybe a little bit the thinking about, okay, this is great that you appreciate it, go do it. Awesome, your turn.
When Ayanna was talking, I remembered one of the challenging personal periods of my life was my father, who I was very close to, passed away one summer fairly rapidly. And I remember after the funeral, I went back to my Stanford office, and I was completely demotivated, probably for the first time in my life. I had no desire to work or do anything. And when I opened my office door, there was a note from a student who I'd actually written a letter of recommendation for that summer in my dad's home, while I was with him, but I knew it was really important to that student to get this letter. And it was the most beautiful card. And it turned back on that spark of motivation. I realized that I'd had such a big impact on the student, and that, of course, my love of academia and mentoring and engineering would come back despite being in a difficult personal position. And so those thank yous have such an impact. Every card I've saved, every one that I've ever gotten, and they mean more than you know when you thank your mentors. So I want to turn from mentoring to the topic of leadership. So this is a panel of engineering women, but also you're all incredible leaders in so many dimensions. What makes a great leader? And what lessons have you learned from your many different leadership roles?
Okay, so I just wrote a book about this. So I work with a lot of women who work in engineering, and they would get so excited as undergraduates, and then I watched time after time, they would join companies, and many of them left after 5 years. But I did see places where they created creative environments where people thrived. And not only were they creative, but they were inclusive. I do believe that innovation and inclusivity are tied together. And in doing a lot of research for this book, one of the things that I found out is that a lot of companies are not creative. If you want to create a culture that is creative, you want to be open to ideas. And if you're not careful, for many companies, they devolve into a command and control approach, where the people at the top want everybody else to do their bidding. But in fact, if you want to create a culture where great ideas come out of it, you want to be able to create environments where all ideas are welcome and listened to. And there are some. You really want to choose carefully where you go. I also think, as I already said, courage is very important. So creating environments that really encourage people to bring their voice forward and to communicate.
I'll go next. So I think that mentorship and leadership go hand in hand, and one of the things I really appreciated about being at Stanford was, even as an assistant professor, I got a lot of face time with the president, the provost, and the deans, and other leaders at the university. I don't know how unique that is among assistant professors, but watching them, learning from them, as well as the folks who mentored me for my PhD and postdocs, what I realized is that being a good listener is very important. It's not always about me, just when I'm with somebody, being present and listening to them. But also, I feel that leading with empathy is really important. And so what I've learned from my mentors and the great leaders that I've had the privilege to work with is that everyone's going through something. You have no idea a lot of times what that is. People are human. They have challenges, they have problems, they have triumphs, they have joys. And I think just being present and being empathetic to what people are going through and just bringing your whole self to that situation, that's what I try to practice in my leadership, and I've learned that from some of the great leaders that I've had the privilege to work with.
So you wanted a little bit of spice, so I'm going to add a little bit of spice here. Right now, I lead a company I've co-founded, Optimum. We're building the internet for blockchain. So we are a universal data acceleration network for blockchain, decentralized. And whenever I have a meeting with, so I'm the CEO with our CTO, chief economist, chief product officer, et cetera. I first listen, as you said, and just ask everybody to go around. We have a topic, we have shared our documents ahead of time before I say anything. And then I take everything, and I may agree with some, don't agree, I synthesize. And then I go ahead and I make a decision, we discuss the decision, and then, the leadership is actually, to me, it's not about my being a leader, I just happen to be in a position of leadership. Okay, so it's about a responsibility for me. I have the responsibility towards the company, towards the clients, towards the investors, towards the employees to make the right decision, and it's on me, it's my responsibility. I don't practice empathy. I don't. I practice respect. I don't know what people are going through, as you said. People don't know what I'm going through. But I give them the space and the respect. And so it's more to me about respect and politeness and I literally say, we don't do empathy. And it sounds horrible, right? But it's actually because, it's literally, for me, it's a matter of, respect and space, okay? So I have a slightly different style, and the listening is part of the respect. You're here because you're really, really competent, and I want to hear what you have to say because that will be helpful for the company. That's it, So that's my style.
Yeah, I don't think we're saying things that are too different.
Okay,
I think
yeah.
my point was just that you don't need to be a jerk or
No.
aggressive to be a good leader.
No.
And I've learned that from
Yes.
a lot of the folks that I've worked with, and that was more of the point I was trying to make.
Yes. So but we definitely do respect.
Respect
And,
and,
yeah,
respect and empathy.
yeah,
Respect
no
and
empathy,
not-
just respect.
Well, and you learn not to be a jerk by example, either because you work with jerks and you see that that's not a good leadership style, or you work with people that have a different personality. Did you want to add anything?
Oh, yeah, so I guess there's three things, but I'll talk about one. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think one of the things is when you go into a room, so I have a 3-dimension of diversity, race, gender, and sometimes age, although that's starting to not be the case in recent years. But it means that when you go into the room and you speak up, a lot of times there's this concentration of like, who are you? And so being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because you will go into rooms and you'd be like, all right. The other is make space for others. I think this is a little bit of the empathy. So as a leader, you kind of already know the answer, just so you know.
Yeah.
But you need to make space for others to voice their opinions. You listen, even though you already know, okay, this is the answer. I need to get you to the answer. So make space for them.
And sometimes you don't. Occasionally there's those occasions where you go, aha, I missed that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel very fortunate that I was at Stanford under two incredible leaders, John Hennessy, who's a Stony Brook PhD alum and will be here Friday and Saturday to introduce me, and John Etchemendy, who was our provost. And they were incredibly accessible, especially I was in the Senate for most of the time that I was at Stanford, including as an untenured professor. And the opportunity to engage with the president, the provost, all the leadership through the Senate was an incredible experience. And some of the best leaders at Stanford came up through the Senate. And so learning from watching great leaders, but then also watching not so great leaders. I would say my co-founder in my startup, not a great leader. He terrorized people. But the company needed both of us. And so figuring out how to deal with those situations where you have to work with someone. You don't have a choice, whether it's a colleague or your boss. You have to figure out how to navigate those situations. So just a couple things I would add to these observations. For me personally as a leader, being open and transparent is essential. I think that that's just the kind of person I am, but I also find it works really well. If you have to make a decision, being able to explain it, and even if people don't agree with it, to explain it and say, this is why I made the decision, is important. Difficult people are the biggest challenge of leadership. People are the challenge of leadership, but the easy people are easy, so it's the difficult people that are hard. So being a leader is inherently a people skill. How do you deal with these difficult people? And then the other thing that came up in my conversation with John King last week was to take criticism well, and I believe assume people have the best of intentions. So you always get a bad paper review, and you're really angry at first, like they just didn't understand, they were stupid, they don't want this to get published, whatever your first reaction is. But then if you take a step back and you say, maybe there's something in there that I didn't write the paper particularly well, or it didn't come out as well as I thought it should. Same with leading in startups, in industry, in universities. If you assume people have the best intentions, even if they don't, you approach the relationship in the best possible way. And, kind of the anger falls away, the defensiveness falls away, and you just say, they have their own intentions, and they're good intentions. And even thinking back to my startup co-founder, we both wanted the company to be successful, and whatever his behavior was, it was for the best intentions of the company. and its success, which mattered to me as well. So I think those are some of the lessons that I've taken.
Yeah, I wanted to add something, especially about the listening. So, and I know this is going to sound weird after I said we don't do empathy, but I used to volunteer as a suicide hotline volunteer, and and basically you are taught to listen. It's also one of the reasons why you're taught not to empathize too much, because you can't do that. You can't. You will drown. Right? You can't. You have to keep your distance. But that listening aspect is super important. It's super, super important. So I would definitely encourage those of you who are thinking, think of volunteering for something like that. It's, again, inherently valuable. And also, I was actually recently hearing of somebody who became a FBI negotiator, for when you have hostage situations. And he was actually told to train to go and become a volunteer at a suicide hotline. That's what he was told to do as a training. So just wanted to put that out there. Yeah.
So on the listening and the reaction, there's actually a trick that I learned, because I was one that someone's like, oh, no, that's wrong. Count to 5 and don't say anything. And what happens is the logical part of your brain actually snaps. And so you can think of, if they're wrong, you think of a way to say it without maybe being confrontational. But then you can say, oh, you know what? I see where they're coming from. And so that's just a little listening. Count to 5. It was from a trained coach.
Very good.
Already being mentored on stage.
Exactly.
Good tricks. I want to turn to the topic of diversity. One of the things that I'm most proud of leading this university and being part of the State University of New York system is that our chancellor says that diversity is in the DNA of the State University of New York. It's in our founding charter. We were founded to educate all New Yorkers, and we are a very diverse state. And in my own experience as a diverse engineer, I found diversity is about excellence. That's why I love Telly's notion that it's for business good. I've seen in my corporate boards that having women and diverse people around the table, you get diverse ideas, and that leads to better outcomes. I've seen that in my startups and my universities. So I'd like to hear from all of you, why is diversity important to the engineering profession? And if it is important, why does the percentage of the women in the field remain so low? And how can we encourage more diverse people to enter and stay in the field of engineering? My understanding is that more than half of the diverse engineers that go into the field leave. So how do we address those issues?
Big topic, Andrea. I'm passionate about diversity. I came up as we embrace diversity. I will say that because in many engineering companies, it became one more outcome in many, and where you were counting and you didn't actually embrace the true nature of diversity. I mean, the real value of diversity is to bring people with different perspectives to a table and to have a conversation. But you need to make sure that everyone has a chance to develop their skills, to continue to grow. You can't just count diversity in hiring, for example, which I observe that many companies, that's where they bottomed out. It is a state of mind. And if you want a diverse leadership, if you want diverse leadership, you need the leadership to embrace that there are people in their company that can contribute to the bottom line. So it really is a state of consciousness. That's where it works the best. And there are tactics that can help you get there, but it's really recognizing that you want them there because the ideas will be greater, the products will be greater, the results will be greater.
Anyone?
I think it's, talking as an engineer, it's a relaxation of constraints, right? So if you have a larger pool over which to optimize, obviously you are going to do better. I mean, to me, it's just that simple. It sounds goofy, but, it's like, of course you want to be able to pick from more people. You will have a better outcome because you have relaxed your constraints. I mean, sometimes it sounds silly, but you're like, maybe it's just that obvious.
But then why haven't we made more progress? Why aren't we opening up the constraints?
I don't understand it. Like, I just actually don't understand it because, again, coming at it from an engineer, you're like, why would you put in extra constraints?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by that, Andrea, because at least, I'm mostly familiar with computer science. Many of the schools are really close to 50% women. I mean, Caltech, my alma mater, which was 13% when I was there, is now 50%. So it's not enough to have more trained engineers and computer scientists graduating. Sure. They have to go into environments where they thrive, and it's a long commitment. And so, at least in tech, that is not always true. I have a colleague, a friend, who was at Genentech, and in bioscience, it really is 50% women, for example. Absolutely. And it's because, it's not just graduating, it's also joining these companies and recognizing their ideas, and it's a lengthy process.
Yeah, I mean, so when I say I don't understand it, I obviously know that, it's not welcoming, right? It's pretty clear. But I don't understand why it's not welcoming, because again, from just a pure optimization and, let's say, in a company's selfish perspective, it should not be that, right? Obviously, you're going to do better if you have a larger, so there's an irrationality there, and I think it's difficult for us as engineers to understand irrationality. Right? It's just like, yeah, but that makes no sense.
I'll you have California, Boston, New York, California, and I'm in the Midwest, and my family's in the South. And so we call, the coasts are, in terms of how they adopt and think about this, is much different than the Midwest and the South, and that is a fact. And so when we think about, and I've had to rethink what it is when we think about diversity, I think we have always done the easy thing of saying, well, if you are underrepresented as a minority or gender or nationality, then by default, you're adding a component of diversity. And we've had to rethink about what is it when we say this, all Ohio or all Georgia, what does that actually mean? It means that we want to ensure that people have access, point blank, whether race or gender. But for engineering, you do have to have this, and we can use intellectual diversity. You have to have different experiences, different lived understandings, different knowledge sets so that you can actually attack the problem. Yes. We have substituted race, gender, nationality as that substitute. Like, oh, of course you're a woman and a man. Of course you think differently, which is actually not the case. And so I think what we're now going through, at least in the Midwest and the South, is how do you think about that diversity through the lens of getting people with different experiences at the table, not looking at race, gender, nationality, age, but it is a shift, and it is important because we always give examples. In fact, Kelly, I think, used to give this one about airbags and how airbags early on killed more women and children than anyone else. And if you kind of peeled back, it was that the testing, so I actually manage a test facility, like the dummies, they didn't have dummies that were the size of the average woman. So, it works, it's safety, but your dummies weren't, well, they weren't woman-sized proportions. And so I think that's part of the conversation.
Yeah, and again, it's part of like irrationality, right? Because you go and it's like, that's not rational, right? Of course you would want to test for the population, Yeah.
Yeah, building off of your comment, I mean, if I look at my own research group, we have students from probably 6 different departments just in my lab. And so I think we have a culture of bringing together people from different experiences and backgrounds to solve really challenging world problems. And so I think it also goes to Telly's point about not counting as well. So on the outside, like I actually used to think that like all of the women leaders were out in industry because they at the time weren't in academia, so they must be in industry. But then going on the outside, like sometimes I'm the only woman in the boardroom, and what's going on with that? And so I stopped focusing so much on counting and just doing my best work, trying to enable others, the mentorship and the leadership we talked about, and kind of looking back at some of the investments that our firm has made over the years. More than half of the investments that we made went to either women founders or women inventors. And again, it wasn't something conscious that we did. It was after the fact we looked back and said, that's what we supported. And so I think it really speaks to all elements of what the panel talked about, and just showing up every day, doing your best work, and just trying to enable and mentor others.
And it is, I think, a little harder for diverse people with diversity very broadly to demonstrate excellence, because there's barriers, including implicit bias and other things. But when I look at the excellence on this stage and around the country in engineering, and it is diverse people in not just gender, not just race, not just geographical region, when you see the power of diversity and excellence together, that eventually, I think, will lead to the profession embracing and recognizing when there are barriers put in place to the best people getting the leadership role or the admission to graduate school or a faculty job, because there's just this notion of being blind to everything except the excellence of the work that's being done. So let's hope for that day. I want to turn to technology. So obviously we're in an era of AI. We have a 2-day AI symposium that's going on here. So AI is a powerful technology, but there's other exciting technologies as well on the horizon. So I wanted to ask all of you, how do you see AI impacting engineering and technology? And what other exciting technologies do you see? There is technology besides AI today. What other exciting technologies do you see on the horizon that you think will have the most positive impact on humanity? Jennifer, you want to start?
So I'll start with the other exciting technologies, because I'm sure we're going to have a lot of focus on AI, both in the week's events and then also from my fellow panelists. So we're in a very special time right now with biology, and so the 19th century maybe was the century of physics, the 20th century was the century of chemistry, better living through chemistry, and then of course we had electrical engineering and computer science kind of come up over the past few decades. During that time, actually, we're able now to read and write DNA at a scale that's just massively paralleled and pretty unprecedented. And so that's enabling the 21st century, which is the century of biology and biotechnology. And so I think we're in a really exciting time in history, and in fact, many of my CS colleagues kind of likened it to when Silicon Valley was being started, and of course you had to develop software and processors and all of the bits and parts that you needed to enable the computer revolution. We have that now with biology, with being able to read and write DNA, translating that into proteins, doing synthetic biology, being able to manipulate genes. How do you kind of put those things into cells? And so it's really just enabling this biotechnology revolution. I was on a panel discussion yesterday with someone, for example, who was working at a company, and they were developing approaches for infectious disease, engineering mosquitoes, for example, that could outcompete dangerous mosquito populations. Or there's a new threat called the screwworm that I learned about, that's apparently a flesh-eating worm that's affecting cattle, and he was saying maybe people. And they're engineering organisms that can go out and outcompete with these natural threats. The idea is that they're sterile, and so that when they mate, they become sterile, so they can't reproduce. And so it's just mind-boggling to see all of the innovations that are kind of happening. So we have one of my colleagues, for example, he's able to do DNA sequencing to be able to tell if someone has Down syndrome from sampling their blood rather than doing amniotic fluid. I mean, I could spend the next 15 minutes we have just talking about all of the amazing technology revolutions that have been happening. And so I think that synthetic biology and just the biotechnology revolution is a big one. I also think that we're sort of resting on our laurels a little bit in the country, and that we've had a National Institutes of Health for many decades now, and we're doing really great biomedical research, but there's a whole area of biological research that we need to support. And in fact, as many of you know, support for R&D and scientific research in this country is a little challenging right now. Other countries have been embracing that and are quickly leveraging the decades worth of science and engineering that our country has been a leader in. And that's something that I'm also just top of mind thinking about and wondering about. But I think what I also see is that many of the other sectors in engineering have a bio element to them. So electrical engineering, biomechanical engineering, biocomputation is going to be really important. So I think people and researchers who can speak both languages of bio and computation and engineering, or I guess that's 3 languages, but are really going to be
And English.
Yes, and English. So people who are pluripotent and can speak many different languages in the fields are really going to be who are going to be driving forward innovation in the country. So I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
So I'm biased because I've been doing robotics and AI since the 90s. So I'm going to say it's AI. But I think when I think about the impact of AI, it is on healthcare, it's on education, it's on prosperity. It's all these things that we think about as fundamental human rights, and AI enables them to be much more accessible and equitable if done correctly. And that leads to the next thing after AI is physical AI, which is basically robotics with the brain. I don't know why they're calling it physical AI, it's robotics. But that is the next thing. I would say in the 10-year time frame, we'll have robotics that are deployed, not in the home, but definitely in logistics centers. They'll be deployed in hospitals, definitely at a more massive scale. And then in 20 years, home robotics. And why I say that is as I look at the investments and the conversations I'm in, they're basically going to brute force this in terms of companies. And so it may not have been academics that are doing it, but there's now a need to be competitive and figure out what the product market fit is. And because of that fact alone, we will have home robotics in about 20 years.
Yeah, so I've mentioned that I lead a company in blockchain. And I liked the historical arc that you were describing, Jennifer. So, if you think of, what is the first technological network that has had real perennity? It's basically the electrical grid. And the reason why it works is because it's not actually centralized. You cannot have a system that is fully centralized because it becomes basically fragile. You need too much information, not just because, you're sort of, you may have a philosophy of decentralization and democratization, but you cannot have something that's centralized because you need too much information, and basically the network just crumbles under the weight of that information. Now, right now is the 150th anniversary of basically, Alexander Graham Bell's first phone call. Actually, I was giving a talk about this this past weekend at the MIT Museum. And that network, which let's call it is now the internet or Web 1, Web 2, that actually was built on the electrical network. And that is also decentralized. And as a matter of fact, whenever you have large failures, whether it be in the in the electrical grid or in the internet, like for instance when there was the Amazon failure a couple months ago, it's usually because of excessive centralization in some part. So what is blockchain? I know that blockchain is fairly nascent in many ways. And you have a system there where you have things like meme coins and people make fun of it and, fair enough. But it's actually the next level after this internet that we're in now. It's basically about the computation, and this relates to the AI. It's about decentralized computation over decentralized data. I started working in decentralized coding. Coding is an area of information theory, as I mentioned before, like Andrea started as an information theorist. I started doing decentralized coding when there was no blockchain. But I knew it had to come. It had to come because that is the arc of history. You have to go decentralized, otherwise it literally does not scale. So I think that that decentralization of computation, which, by the way, carries with it a democratization, but will not happen because people want necessarily democratization. It'll happen because that's the only way a system can actually scale. That, to me, is going to be the most exciting. And then it will underlie, any discoveries that are happening basically in terms of, drug discovery. You need to have the data, and you need to be able to verify on chain, by the way, that the data is not junk, right? And where the data came from, and its provenance, and who owns it. You will have to actually figure out, what are your surroundings, and that, the correctness of what your robot is doing, that has to be on chain. So to me, that's the most exciting thing, and it underpins all of these other wonderful technologies and progresses that we're talking about.
Kelly.
So, well, a couple of things. One is that I was part of what I would call the Silicon Revolution, where we had this idea of creating complex silicon, and we had all kinds of ideas. And by the way, it was also decentralized, which is interesting.
That's right.
And you can see the results of that in things like the NVIDIA processor. So, and it now enables AI. I mean, we're at the start of these technology revolutions that really are going to be part of all of our lives for as long as we can think about it. We talk about AI, but we use it as a single entity. And in fact, AI is a complex set of solutions. I mean, and we talked about robotics, and that's certainly true, but there's AI that's going to be part of all kinds of different systems. And in fact, most of the interesting innovations will be at the boundary between AI or computing and other disciplines. I mean, biology is the first obvious one where, there's just going to be all kinds of amazing new products, new solutions. I mean, you can see them coming. You see autonomous vehicles. I mean, we're partway through the revolution, and there will be many others. So right now, you can kind of see where all these innovations are going to take us. I mean, I was just hearing about a mini nuclear plant, which is just bizarre. So there's just some very exciting kinds of technologies that will be part of the future.
We had a poster session yesterday as part of our AI symposium, and the breadth of applications of AI across science, humanities, social science, healthcare is remarkable. I mean, it's a new tool. And if you think of it as a tool, it's a very powerful tool that can transform so many different areas, but it's the domain knowledge of understanding how to apply this powerful tool that's important.
Can I just make a quick connection between this and the diversity aspect that we talked about? Because particularly this decentralization actually feeds into this diversity aspect. You now potentially have a very, very different demographic having access to some of these tools, and I just wanted to highlight that.
Right, and you could argue the internet did that as well.
The
right?
internet has absolutely done that.
You can access information anywhere in the world because of a decentralized technology that started in the 60s and nobody knew where it would take us. And I think AI, we also don't
We don't know
where it's going to take us. I want to take a few minutes for questions from the audience. I think we have some mic runners. Do we have any questions from the audience for this esteemed panel before we close out? Don't be shy. Maybe introduce yourself also when you ask your question.
Hi, my name is Jessica. I work in Marketing and Communications Department at Stonebrook. Thank you guys. It's been a pleasure hearing your stories. We have a few entrepreneurs and many people, all of you really, who have broken boundaries in many ways. Can you talk about how you faced doubt and fear throughout your careers and what that looks like to you and how you overcome in those situations?
Thanks for the question. I think it's important to acknowledge imposter syndrome. I don't think that ever truly goes away. I think everyone, if they're maybe being honest, has some form of imposter syndrome. Maybe just some people are more open to admitting it or not. I mean, even coming here today with this amazing group of individuals, I mean, there's always an element of, am I good enough, or Am I going to measure up? At least for me, especially coming from the beginnings I came from, that's never kind of gone away. And always feeling like, especially in a new opportunity or a new situation, having to feel like I have to prove myself or just sometimes prove that maybe I deserve to have a seat at the table. But just acknowledging that that exists and even exists for someone at our level, and for many of us, it doesn't go away.
It doesn't. I remember my first year as dean, I was meeting with a senior person, and I made a decision. They were like, you know, I could have had your job, I just didn't apply. Okay. And so I think it continues to happen. I have a philosophy of any time I'm going into a situation where I know I'm going to be uncomfortable, I come up with, make sure that they know that you were there, right? And what does that look like for me? Which means that I have an objective function, and as long as I achieve my own personal objective function, then I've achieved, even if there's like, oh my gosh, I don't know, they're gonna say stupid stuff like that, but then I feel successful in my own because I did something that I said I was going to do, and so that's just my personal way of addressing it.
I think we can ask another question.
Yeah, and I think this is also where mentors and supporters come in, where, you know, you're not sure you should apply for that dean job, or you're not sure you're ready for some new position or to do a startup, and having someone who believes in you, you know, even before you believe in yourself, can make a difference at every career stage. I think certainly I talked to a lot of mentors and supporters before I applied to be president of Stony Brook, because I hadn't been a president before. I didn't know if I could do it, and, you know, people thought I could do it, and that gave me the confidence to say, yeah, I think I could do it. Other questions from the audience? There's one back there. Oh, go ahead, sure. And then we'll call on that.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been awesome. My name's Pamela Abshire, and I am the chair of the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. I think, that, you know, to Stony Brook's credit, I don't think anyone's really said this in public, but I think I'm the first chair in the College of Engineering, the first female chair.
Yay.
Yeah. So the question, this is maybe an effort to get towards a little bit of spicy conversation, because I think you all have a lot to share with us. One of the unique constraints on women leaders, and I think, is that we're not allowed to be rude. We're not allowed to be demanding. And I've heard that come out in several of the conversations and several of the anecdotes that you've mentioned. And I just wanted to kind of get your take on that, because I think I've been in committees myself where I said something that was maybe a little bit harsh, and I took it to someone and said, well, you know, this was reported about me in the press, and they were like, I can't do anything with that because you sound catty. And, you know, like, there's this very, very thin line for a woman leader, and I think it represents a very specific constraint on women as leaders. And I was just wondering if you could say a few words about that in your experience and how you've navigated that.
I mean, communication is hard, and as it's important, one of the 6 C's in my book is about communication, because I saw so many people have great ideas, but then nobody knew about those ideas. I also realized that for women leaders, you have to learn to speak up. I mean, several people have mentioned this, and stay focused even when you get very negative criticism, because there are people who are not going to appreciate you even being there, but it's important to continue to show up.
I think, you know, certainly being rude, I don't think women or men leaders should be allowed that, you know, then. And I think it's fine to call out people, you know, this goes back to the respect and politeness aspect. I think there's a big difference between being rude and being assertive. And I think if you are polite, it actually gives you more room for being assertive. You know, there are expectations. Yeah, I ignore them. I mean, that's just, you know, I talked about, you know, the benefit of, you know, experiences, and I mentioned, you know, working in volunteering at a crisis hotline. You know, the other great training that I had was playing rugby. You know, you're just gonna get knocked and get hurt, and you just get back up. But I think it's fine to be assertive if you do it. And you know, I think for those of you who know me, but
She's
you know,
assertive.
I am assertive. But you know, I mentioned all of these, you know, mentoring awards of people just, you know, all the students voting for me and all the postdocs, you know, from like literally over 1,400 faculty, you know, voting for me. It's not like it doesn't necessarily come across as caring. But I think it's fine I think just give yourself the space and say, look, you know, I'm talking to you rationally, make rational arguments in a polite way, but firmly, and because they are based on rational arguments, you know, it's not ad hominem, it is what it is.
I think it's a personal choice of how you show up, of how you present your persona. And if you are comfortable with someone saying, because whether you're assertive, they're going to call you draconian, they're going to bossy, right? They're going to use those words anyway. And so you have to figure out what gets under what gets you, triggers you versus not. So in the South, they say, bless your heart. And then they'll stab you as they smile. So that's what I tend to do. People will say, oh, she is so nice, and say, oh, you don't know her very well. Yeah. And so, but you have to choose, because it drove me crazy when people would say certain things. I was like, okay, I don't like that, that triggers me, so I'm gonna show up a little differently so I get a different result, even though, like, I can't, bless your heart, you'll hear me say that quite a bit, right before I fire you, right? But you have to decide what your triggers are and what you're comfortable with.
One quick question in the back, and then we'll wrap up. Is there a hand back there?
Hi, nice to meet you guys. My name is Ibrahim Rashid. I'm a peer career coach intern at the Career Center. Just a quick question, kind of like rooted in like me working at the Career Center as well. You see in like today's economy, a lot of students post-grad and post-undergrad are struggling, to find full-time positions. And seeing as you guys are so, developed both in your professional careers and also in academia, what kind of advice would you give to students, who are struggling after graduating?
And I'll just ask if you have any other closing remarks to couple with that answer to that very powerful question. You want to tell me?
Well, right now it's hard. I mean, you just have to acknowledge that it is hard to find a job. I do think that if you're looking for a job, looking at your network, so if you can call Joe, who's working at Synopsys, or Alfred that is working at Google, and try and break through the automated systems that are screening everybody out. That's a great first step. You also just want to continue to develop your skills, because the jobs are going to change. I mean, there are some companies, for example, that are hiring more entry-level students right now because it's the first AI native population that they can hire. So, but it is, there's a lot more work in terms of trying to get the jobs. And just in closing remarks, I mean, I think right now is an exciting time. There's a lot going on, so I hope that especially the students out there think about what they're going to do, because right now you can have a huge impact.
Right. Yeah. I think so. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that it is terrifying, and I'm a mother of 4 young adults. I see it. It is terrifying. I can say what we do in our company. We hire people with the technical skills, but increasingly, some of the more low-level aspects can be done, through AI, basically. And so now I think we're looking more for judgment. Judgment and the ability to participate in a team in a positive way. So some of the skills that are not as replaceable that we find right now is making those judgment calls, coordinating with your colleagues, making the right decision. And if anything, I think the selection process has become a little bit more on soft skills. And I am not somebody about soft skills and so on, it's not my gig. But it is. And so, in terms of closing remarks, this does again point towards a lot of the things we talked about being flexible, about being able to take those funny turns and, not get discombobulated because you can deal with it, about being able to manage in a much more diverse and maybe more confusing environment. So I think that's, that while at the same time understanding the tech and being passionate about it. So I think that's what we're looking for. It's harder. It's going to be harder for your generation. It is also going to be more exciting in many ways.
Yeah, so I think, and this ties into also my closing remarks, is that typically when we have graduated students, we have basically pitched being fulfilled, because you now have a job in your career, coupled with now you get a paycheck. And we've said you can do both. And I believe now at this time that in some cases that have to be disconnected, which I think is achievable. And so being fulfilled, it might be that you are really interested in cooking, but you couldn't get a job in. But you really are interested in that. Like, there are actually jobs where you can volunteer, you can figure that out, and you can be a great cook. And then maybe you just get a job that pays your bills. But I think we haven't taught students that in a long time. I grew up, work study, I had to work in the cafeteria, and I hate it. I was an engineer, but guess what? I worked in the cafeteria. And so I think that's kind of where we have to move and give advice, and I give my students this kind of advice as well, like be fulfilled. Go volunteer at a startup, go ... and then figure out how do you pay your bills.
Pragmatism.
Yeah, I guess I'll just combine what was said and offer my own closing remarks, but something that I wish I had focused more on was the network, as Telly mentioned. Don't just keep your head down and stay in your lane. Take advantage of all the amazing things that this university has to offer to build up your skills, to build up your network. I also think that the uncertainties and twists and turns can lead to new opportunities that maybe you weren't even imagining. So we just hired somebody at Stanford in bioengineering who's a professional chef, and he's now engineering food. So he's using synthetic biology to develop new food that's based on waste. We built him a test kitchen. So I think these opportunities and new challenges could lead to exciting new technologies as well. So just be flexible and open.
And one of the things that I find so amazing at this university is our students are very resilient. We have 40% of the first in their families to go to college, 40% are Pell Grant eligible. And you've dealt with so many twists and challenges already. So understanding that the opportunities ahead of you are not just go work for Google or Meta, being more flexible, open-minded. Maybe you start your own company. Maybe you go work for a small company that needs an engineer to do something that you hadn't envisioned before. So I think that flexibility and resilience and optimism, which I see in our students every day, will serve you well. So let me just close out. We're a few minutes over, but it was just such an honor and pleasure to have all of you here. I'm really, really touched that you came and you shared your incredible journeys and words of wisdom with our audience here. Thank you for sharing your paths and your wisdom. And I'm walking away myself with a valuable lesson from each of you. I learned something from everything that you said, that these discussions are so important to understand things you didn't see before, that talking to people that are successful, that have different experiences, can open up lanes of knowledge and learning no matter where you are in your career. I mean, I've learned so much from this discussion. It's incredible. And I want to encourage all of you as you look at these remarkable people on this stage and think about their journeys. They didn't know what the destination was and where they ended up and the incredible impact that they've had. All of you can have that impact as well. So one of the things that makes me so delighted about this event is giving our students and our community the opportunity to hear from trailblazing leaders like all of you. Thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you for being part of this incredible day. Thank you so much. Captions.